Board members, I am coming to you this evening with a draft optimization plan. And I say that because this plan, although very much so informed by data that we've had over years, that we've compiled and reviewed and analyzed over years, and certainly looking at where we are today, it is one that we know will require considerable engagement and discussion, investigation to determine if it's exactly as it needs to be, and so we know that going in. But I do want to and will present to you this draft plan. Okay. As always, we want to start with our core values and lift up a few of the core values that we believe are most, this is not, oh, maybe I should turn it on. Okay. A few of the core values that we believe are underscored in this work, and those being excellence and our drive towards excellence and our eye towards excellence, excellence in our work, supporting our young people in reaching excellence, and that's excellence across the board, not just in the classroom, but across our district. Excuse me, this continued push and drive towards equity, and understanding that this means that all means all. Every one of our scholars demands, requires, and is owed optimal learning experiences and environments, and the very best that the adults around them have to offer. And as well, positive and respectful culture, not the least of which involved in that is ensuring that our learning environments and that our structures lend themselves towards spaces and opportunities and experiences that demonstrate the level of respect and what we want for our scholars. Why is a district optimization or right sizing necessary? And we typically use the term optimization because we do believe that our job is to optimize optimize opportunities and to optimize the resources that we have for educating our scholars and serving families. And so that's something that's the language that we would like to lift up. But why is it necessary? In a nutshell, as I believe everyone here knows, our school districts are funded per pupil, and most of the fixed costs in our school sites and even across the district itself, but especially in our school sites, to include utilities, staffing, materials, facilities, maintenance, all of that. Those are shared across the student populations at each of those schools, and therefore, when you have less students in a school, you spend more per student in that school. Right? And so this optimization or right sizing is a way of ensuring that we have the optimal resourcing, classrooms, teachers, technology, restrooms, HVAC, all the things that we in many places don't even blink or think about because they're right there and as they should be. But just making sure that we have that in each of our schools by maintaining appropriate and reasonable enrollment levels in order to provide for those. So when I think about, and as I've been kind of pondering and preparing for these conversations around optimization, wanted to clearly articulate our rationale for optimizing. One, as we've described and discussed, I believe, many times previously, we continue to see a decline in our enrollment. And in several years, it's been to the tune of 1,000 plus scholars each year. So we've continued to see declining enrollment. We also know that we, as we've seen, we've discussed, we've had many board items, agenda items here before this board asking for your support as we've needed to make significant investments in our buildings, significant across many of our buildings, and that's even including some of our newer buildings where HVAC systems have started to fail us, or some of the other issues that we've seen. And so unfortunately, this continues to be a part of our reality, where we've got to make significant investments in buildings, and at some point you run out of money, and so you've got to start prioritizing, and you've got to think about where is that money best spent in which of our facilities. And obviously thinking about where you can serve most of your scholars the best. Also stabilizing staff. And I'll spend a minute on this because I've got some updated numbers for you. Right now, board members, we're carrying about 465 vacancies across the district. 465 across all aspects of our district. 178 of them are classified individuals, and 178 are certified individuals, and 259 are classified. The total number of teachers that we have, or teacher units that we have for this school year, is 1,619. That's those who are on the teacher pay scale, so that would include librarians and even counselors and other folks, interventionists and all of those people. But of those, 468 are new and novice. Now I want to be real clear, because I don't ever want to be misconstrued in the point that I'm making here. Everybody starts their career somewhere at some point. We were all first-year teachers, first-year principals, first-year whatever our roles might be at some point. So that's not, that in and of itself is not an issue. But the reality is, because of our turnover, we will continue to have such a large number of new and novice team members to staff across our current footprint, the number of schools and classrooms that we're operating from. And it's just a challenge, and we're seeing nationally fewer people going into education, coming through our schools of education, and so there's a strain there. And those new and novice teachers, 109 are in their first year. 137 are in their second year, so they have 1 year of experience. 122 are in their third year, and 100 of them with 3 years experience. So they're in the first couple of months of their fourth year. On emergency licenses, we have 185 teachers. Now, some of them have added endorsements, and that's about 105. But that means 80 of them are special non-renewable licenses, and likely new teachers. And so I lift these numbers up because this issue of stabilizing our staffing is very real to us. With fewer people going into the field of education or getting licensed to be teachers, we're competing across the board with other districts, let alone other fields of work and industries. You know, anytime you have teachers or even school leaders going to retail or some of the other industries because they can get competitive pay or better pay, you know, you've got some issues there. And so this stabilization of our staffing is very real. And as we look at the number of scholars that we serve and the number of spaces, classrooms that continue to spread our staff out, we've got to rethink that and position ourselves better to have to rely on fewer of these emergency licenses and to better pay our folks and support them so that they can stay longer and help us to build up the level of capacity and experience in our schools. The other thing that I'll lift up is just an opportunity to bolster and innovate across school programs. We're not prepared tonight to talk about specific programs, but there's been conversation about immersion programs where we offer to our scholars some immersion programs and help them to start to learn and develop proficiency in foreign languages. We talk about global citizenship. What better way to support our young people in living and operating and competing globally than to have additional languages at the ready? And there are other programs that we're currently running that we want to better invest in. Of course, our IB program, of course, our APAC program, but there are others in our CDC, our Career Development Center, that we want to continue to build out and better tie to the emerging industries and workforce needs that as we're understanding them. There's also this need for increased competitiveness. Now, y'all have gotten to know me over the last several years. I'm a little competitive. I'll admit that publicly. And I certainly want to put us in a better position for our scholars for iron to sharpen iron, academically, athletically, artistically. And as we rethink our feeder patterns and how we position our high schools, our middle and high schools, there's an opportunity for our programs to be more competitive and to provide for even greater opportunities to show up and really, really dominate across the board. And there's no reason why Jackson Public Schools in the city of Jackson shouldn't be dominating across the board. One of the things that I believe we've lifted up previously, but I want to underscore here, as schools get smaller, the enrollment in individual schools declines, the amount of title funds in that school declines. And oftentimes, school leaders and the decision-making bodies or leadership teams at schools will determine that they want to utilize some of their Title I funding, some of that federal funding, to pay for an additional staff member, whether it's an additional interventionist, a dean of students, an additional a tutor or set of tutors. There are any number of options that folks might employ to support their scholars in their schools. Well, one of the things that these smaller schools are challenged with is, as the title funds decline, they don't have as much flexibility for building out the kinds of programs to wrap around the scholars that they might want or need. And so that's something that we've had. That's a very real issue that we've had in some cases where we as a broader district have had to infuse additional funds at a school because they don't have sufficient funds, title funds, to do something that they actually need to do on behalf of their scholars. And then the last thing that I'll note here is, and we've talked about this some, especially with regard to our insurance, our property insurance. We know that as we think about optimization and think about opportunities to operate more efficiently as a district, that we also have to reconsider our the use of buildings and what we do with those buildings, repurposing those buildings. Our carrying costs, whether it's property insurance, maintenance of the grounds, securing the grounds, and that's inclusive of the people who might have to respond to any issues or threats to our buildings, on and on and on. Those costs are mounting, and we know that this is an area where we've got to lean in and make some really tough decisions. And that could include selling properties, leasing properties, or perhaps raising buildings. And by this I mean, for folks who aren't familiar with that term, demolishing those buildings. And there are models and examples in other districts where they've raised those buildings and planted trees and created walking paths and park benches and all sorts of things. There are opportunities for us to utilize that space in other ways, not just as a building for, whether it's for a school or for another program. And so, again, wanted to walk through some of these as some of the key rationales for our recommendation that we optimize the district. And so also want to add or share just a little bit of the updated data with regard to enrollment. I'll give you a moment just to let this sink in. And this is just since 2015. And if we go back to 2012 or what have you, we'll likely see the decline, even greater decline from the 30,000s at some point we were. And this is just through last year. I believe right now we're sitting below 18,000 for this school year. Those numbers are still shaking out, some coming in, some going out, but we're sitting just below 18,000 is my understanding as to our current enrollment. It's pretty stark. And for some, these are just numbers, and they might not mean much, but they absolutely mean to us, on average, 1,000 times the per pupil funding each year, even as our payments to charters continue to increase, even as our utility costs continue to increase, even as we get smarter and become and more honest with ourselves as to the cost of educating children, not the least of which is what we should actually be paying our educators and others throughout the district. As we come to grips with that and make some decisions in those regards, our costs go up, but our scholars are declining. Something has to give. Wanted to share these numbers now. Most of this, except for the blue row, most of this information is taken from the 21-22 school year. That's the most recent National Center for Education Statistics data that we could gather. But the comparisons are there, and we just gave some updated data from 22-23 in Jackson Public Schools. And the point here really is to shine a light on the size, the enrollment size in these other districts and the numbers of schools that they're operating. And I will say, although Birmingham City at the time was operating 49 schools with 21,000, just over 21,000 scholars, as of this past year, their enrollment was down by, I believe, just 200 or so scholars, but they had closed 7 of their schools. So they're currently operating 42 schools. So clearly this issue of optimization is not just a Jackson thing, not by any stretch. It's a conversation that's happening in Chicago, in Detroit, Indianapolis, I know, has gone through a bit of this. Oakland, California has gone through quite a bit of this more recently. So these are our national issues, and for us to think or assume that we can just ignore something that nationally folks are grappling with is foolhardy. We shared this information before, but just want to put this before you. A couple of years ago, these were actual numbers, enrollment numbers from some of our schools to highlight this issue. But again, it's the point here is that the more scholars you have in a school, the more you can spread the costs, the expenses of that school across those scholars. The fewer scholars you have in that school, the more you're spending per scholar to run that school. And so, and that's true across all of the divisions. So for elementary schools, if you're operating an elementary school at 235 scholars, you would be spending about over $10,000 per scholar to operate that school, that elementary school. with the typical elementary schedule and typical elementary staffing model, and all those things can be adjusted, but the point is still there. You're going to spend more if you've got fewer scholars. At 500, with just over 500 scholars, you'd be spending almost half the amount in that same school. The same program, same staffing, or pretty much the same staffing. You can be spending far less. And then you see the differences across the board. It's pretty stark, the differences that we've seen, and these aren't just, again, dummy numbers. Now, it's a couple of years old, this data, but these are examples from our district. And now we've got elementary schools less than 200 scholars. Actually, a handful of elementary schools with less than 200 scholars. So, all right, so wanted to spend a little bit of time on the groundwork there and some of the rationale and some of the data. Now I want to share with you, again, our proposed optimization for our district. And I'll prepare you that, I pushed the team to go hard because, as you've seen, going back just a couple of slides, the decline in our enrollment has not stopped. I don't know where it'll bottom out. I don't know. It has not stopped. And so there's a chance that we'll continue to see a decline. But based on where we are and what we've seen over the last several years, we thought it necessary to really challenge ourselves to do something that will make a difference. And so here we are. These are the schools that we're recommending for closure or consolidation. We've got an asterisk next to Obama Elementary School, Obama Magnet, and Wells APAC, because those schools, the proposal is that we co-locate those elementaries with their natural feeder middle schools. And so Obama with Northwest, and Wells APAC with Bailey. And to note, Wells APAC would operate still the 4th and 5th grade added to Bailey APAC for 6th, 7th, and 8th. But Obama operating from kindergarten on up. Okay. This is our current thinking, and you see we've got draft all over it, and want to continue to stress that this is our current thinking. We're continuing to run traps and looking at boundaries and how they fit or don't, and what this could mean for our busing, our transportation, et cetera, et cetera. But this is where we are today. For Callaway High School, the feeder would be Kirksey, Powell, a piece of Powell Middle School, and or those who attend Powell Middle School, and North Jackson Elementary School. And we'll talk about some of the changes and what some of this means in just a moment. For Forest Hill High School, Cardozo Middle School, Peoples Middle School, or part of Peoples Middle School, Bates Elementary, Marshall, Timberlawn, what we're calling Witten Elementary now, but that would be Shirley and Sykes combined in one building, perhaps renamed. Okay, I'll name that, but in elementary together, and then Van Winkle. And then with Jim Hill High School, Blackburn Middle, Northwest, as it articulates the IB program, on up to high school, part of Peoples Middle, depending on where those scholars live, their home address. Isabel Elementary School and Wilkins Elementary School. And then for Lanier, Powell, so Lanier has, obviously, we've already established the junior high school at Lanier. In addition, Powell Middle School, and so that's some of the students from Powell, not all, some of the students. And then Galloway, Johnson, and Walton Elementaries. And for Murrah, Bailey, APAC, and to include Bailey APAC program and Bailey Middle School, because some of the scholars from the former Chastain would be rerouted, rezoned at Bailey. And so much like Murrah High School, we would operate both the APAC program and the regular middle school program there. And also zoned to Murrah would be Boyd, Casey, McLeod, McWillie, and Span Elementaries. And then for Provine High School, the middle school articulating there would be Blackburn, much of Blackburn, Middle, Pecan Park, and John Hopkins. John Hopkins is currently zoned for Callaway, just because it's so far out west. It's zoned for Callaway, but as we've experienced it, many of those scholars, most of those scholars actually end up at Provine anyway. And so that's the plan there. All of our program schools would remain. JTEX, the JPS, Tougaloo, Early College High School, our middle college with Jackson State, REAP, or Reimagining Academic Progress program, the Career Development Center, our Fast Track program, which we're currently operating out of Whitten Middle School, our Virtual Academy, which is coming online this year, Henley Young Detention Center, Capital City, all of those programs will continue to operate. And most of them will continue to operate where they are. There may be some movement of the REAP program, Fast Track, those two, REAP and Fast Track programs. So just want to share a little more of the proposed changes. We already have the adjustment that's been made to Powell and Brinkley. Brinkley no longer operating as a standalone school, but really being subsumed into Lanier. Powell being the middle school in that area, and perhaps with a name change. I haven't lost track of that recommendation around Brinkley, the use of Brinkley name in the new school. Greene would merge with North Jackson Elementary, and John Hopkins would be moved again to the Provine feeder pattern and out of the Callaway feeder pattern. Lots of changes in Forest Hill as Wingfield goes offline in this proposal. So Peoples would be formally merged with Whitten in the Peoples building. Oak Forest would merge with Marshall Elementary. Shirley and Sykes would be relocated to the plan, was to be relocated to the Whitten building, and we know that would require some continued work in that Whitten building to ensure that those scholars have what they need there. And so that's an example of some investments that we would have to make in order to make that work. And all of the currently zoned Wingfield scholars would be zoned for Forest Hill. Talked about again the Whitten merger with Peoples. Clausell would merge with Isabel. Obama would be merged with Northwest Middle to create a K-8 school. Key and Clausell and Lester would merge with Wilkins. And again, that's just a testament to how small those schools are. And there's a small piece of the current Wingfield zone that would be annexed to Jim Hill. And so while most of the current Wingfield school boundaries or zone would go to Forest Hill, there's a small piece that would be articulated to Jim Hill. Lanier, Dawson would merge with Johnson. Smith would merge with Walton. And again, some of the Powell scholars would be zoned to Lanier. Chastain and Wells, APAC would both merge with Bailey, APAC, under the Murrah feeder. And then lastly, Lake would merge with Pecan Park in their newly renovated building. And Rains would merge with John Hopkins. Some of the continued planning and consideration to make all of this make sense and to make it work. We need to continue to review and revise the boundary lines for each school. Our team has already drafted some new boundaries, and so we're pressure testing those and looking at them more closely to see what, the extent to which those make sense and what might be some pain points or challenges with any of that. Developing the plan for school-based staff optimization, for transitions and/or reduction in force. There is a chance that we may need to have a reduction in force. But as we've experienced previously, and as I discussed earlier, we have such turnover each year that there's a good chance that the vast majority of our staff members will land, those who intend to remain, will land with us in some of the positions, not necessarily in their current school or feeder pattern, but in other opportunities. At the same time, and you saw some of the numbers when we compared our district against even our current numbers against other districts, we know that we've got to look again at the size of our central office. I will name, though, and I should have named it earlier, that data often is a bit skewed because the comparisons across districts, because not all districts count all of their staff in their counts. For many districts, they farm out, they contract for transportation, for child nutrition, for custodial work, et cetera. And so those folks would not be necessarily counted in the central office staffing numbers. That's because it's a contracted service. And so while we directly employ all those folks in all of those different bodies of work, we have to, we of course do count them in our numbers. So even still, we know that if we're looking across schools for ways to operate more efficiently, that we should do the same. We must do the same in our central office as well. So that's one of the things to get our heads around and investigate and determine where we go with that. Also developing a plan for scholar transitions, both the transactional technical moves from this school to that or this feeder pattern to that one, but also the supporting scholars as we've done in the past with this once was your school, now this is your school. And so how do we help scholars not to have too much of a challenge in making that transition? How do we help them to transition as smoothly as possible, and their families and as well as staff? Want to finalize any new or enhanced program offerings. This is something I'm very excited about and confident that we'll have at least one new major commitment program offering, if not more. But also, as I noted, we'll likely work to enhance some of the program offerings that we have, just to bolster those. Want to clarify and promote the process for repurposing JPS facilities. You all have seen, I believe, our site, our webpage that lists our current facilities. Obviously, there will be more if this should be approved. This plan should be approved, and so want to redouble our efforts to promote that and clarify the process even for repurposing, how folks should engage with us if they already have a program. And thankfully we've had at least a handful of folks to reach out to us and are currently working through and considering some of our properties and using them for some of the programs that they run. But that's clearly going to be super important for us. Also developing a prioritized list of buildings to be raised. We already know that some of our buildings are in serious disrepair. We know that there's community concern about some of those buildings, and of course that's going to be one of the major concerns that folks will lift up with this proposal, and so we know that. And as I've lifted up previously with some other funding that we believe is going to come online for us, flexible funding, we want to utilize some of that to demolish some of the buildings that are not likely to come back online, that require major upgrades or renovations or what have you for anyone to operate, and ones that are just hardest for us to maintain or even secure. And so that's something that we want to be open about, that conversation, and hope that community members will see this as an opportunity, especially with this opportunity to create walking trails or just a green space or something like that in the neighborhoods. And then lastly, we want to promote some dates for community engagement regarding this set of proposals around optimization. We're committing to at least 4 sessions to be held across our city, and that's over the course of the rest of this month and much of October. Want to hold those sessions, those community forums at schools and at community sites. The first one has been scheduled at Forest Hill High School, and we will be promoting that and encouraging as many people as possible to join us for that, just so that everyone knows our goal is to use the next 2 months to engage, to listen, to revise, to refine, to add, perhaps subtract, but to ensure that the plan is as informed as possible, and that we will come back to this board on December the 5th, I believe, is the first board meeting in December. And so our plan is to come back to you with our final set of recommendations at that board meeting, to include the school closures and consolidations, any planned facility investments with the limited tax notes or otherwise, and with recommendations for building repurposing up to and including buildings that we might be recommending by that time to be razed or demolished.